So maybe I can start while the slide will be shown. And today I would like to present you my research, which, okay, so I have sent you. Um, I have conducted in Šalčininkai region, and I assume many of you don't know where the Šalčininkai region is. So I will show it in a map when it will be available. Now, and in my research, I use two theoretical approaches: sociocultural memory and collective identity. Jonathan Friedman claims that a social cultural memory of a community often manifests in the narratives that connect its experience and create coherent story about it is and its surroundings. Such narratives have a significant impact on local identity in a multi-ethnic region of Šalčininkai in southeast Lithuania. According to Aleida Asman, our memories of the past are always shaped by our present situation. Some aspects of the past are magnified while others are forgotten. A strong relationship between sociocultural memory and collective identity exists. Collective memories provide so-called materials from which collective identity is built. Collective identity, on the other hand, influences which collective memories are preserved and which are forgotten. During this presentation, I would like to discuss how collective memory, especially expressed as narratives, shapes the collective identity of the inhabitants in Šalčininkai region. Empirical data for this presentation was gathered during the field research conducted from 2015 to 2018. Explore in the Šalčininkai region. Exploratory research was conducted in 2015 by participating in public celebration in Šalčininkai city. Okay, so maybe I can go back a little bit and comment. You can see a map of Lithuania, Belarus, Poland, and a little bit Kaliningrad. And this area, which is confined by these red lines, is what local inhabitants call Šalčininkai region. Now, it is very important to understand that such a region officially does not exist. It only exists in local people's imagination. As you can see, part of Lithuania, this is the border between Lithuania and Belarus. It divides this region in two, and about 2/3 of this region belong to Lithuania and 1/3 to Belarus. But according to local people's imagination, this is like a one cultural area to which they are emotionally attached. So when I say Šalčininkai region, we should be thinking about this huge territory in Lithuania and Belarus. And it is important to say that I conduct my research only in Lithuania, so I didn't make any research in Belarus. Okay, and other maps are very similar, so we can just stay with this one. So as I have said, during my field research, I spent from 1 week to 10 days in Šalčininkai visiting different towns and villages. During the field research, observation, participant observation, and live stories interviews were conducted. Only local people who were born and grew up in this region were selected for the interviews. A term local describes a person who identifies with this territory, which you can see in a map, who feels identity boundaries between people in this region and other parts of Lithuania or Belarus. During my research, I have conducted around 90 live stories interviews. Such topics as family life, local tradition, local history, connection with Poland and Belarus were discussed. My analysis and ideas that I'm presenting to you today are based on this research. My research shows that a person's identity and narratives communicated by him correlates heavily with a person's age. 3 age groups can be identified among the local people I have talked to. Number 1, oldest inhabitants around 75 or 80 years old or older. The second age group is people about from 40 to 65 years old, something like that. and the young people who are about up to 30 years old, who were born after 1990s, after independence of Lithuania. So now I will present all these three age groups and what kind of narratives being shared by these and what kind of collective identity these people have. So the first one is the oldest inhabitants, about 75, 80 years old or older, who also have the lowest education. These people call themselves locals. The feeling of being local, these people explain the following way, I quote, "Our history is very complicated. Let's take Vilnius, for example. Russians ruled it, then Lithuanians, then Poles, then Soviets, then again Lithuanians, then Soviets. Now Vilnius belongs to Lithuania. How these changes have affected people? Which country should people in Vilnius identify themselves with? During their lifetime, they lived in 3 or 4 different countries. My father was born in 1909 in Russia. During the war, these territories were under Germans. Then Soviets came, then Lithuanians, then Poles, then again Germans. During one lifetime, the rulers of these territories have changed 6 times. And each of them asks, who are you? So the best answer, the safest way is to say, I'm local, end of quote. Historical circumstances heavily affected people's identity, and I quote, my grandfather was illiterate. He spoke the simple language, poprosto. When someone asked these uneducated people who they were, these peasants said, we are locals. My grandfather lived here, my father lived here, and I live here. We don't know who we are. We locals, and that's all we know, end of quote. It is important to understand that historical circumstances didn't allow these people to form more or less stable identity and narratives about themselves and their community. During the 20th century, Shalchininkai region belonged to Russia's empire, Poland, Lithuania, and the Soviet Union. All these countries conducted very different policies towards local inhabitants. Every country wanted to portray this territory and its inhabitants as its own. Lithuanians wanted to portray and make inhabitants of these territories Lithuanians. Poles and Russians did the same. Sometimes these efforts manifested as discrimination on a daily basis against certain group of people. These people tell narratives which explain that a person can be discriminated, harassed, or even killed because of his or her identity. One elderly man in Eišiškė city told me such a story, I quote, it was the first day of the war between Russians and Germans. German army was approaching Eišiškė and Russian partisans assaulted them. After entering Eišiškė town, Germans had noticed a local Pole who looked suspicious to them. They started to shout at him, Russian, Russian, thinking he had been involved in a previous assault on German troops. The man tried to explain that he is Polish and he knows nothing about the assault, but he was shot on a spot by Germans as a Red Army partisan, end of quote. No wonder that remembering such experience, many people avoided to express their identity clearly and instead identify themselves as locals. And I must say that people have different terms or words to say local, because local in English, but people use such words like tutejši or miejscowy or miestny человек in these local languages, which like Polish, Belarusian, Russian. So this was the first age group, the oldest people. Now the second age group, middle-aged people around 40 to 60 years old, they combine local and ethnic identity. These people like to identify themselves as local Pole, local Russian, local Belarusian, etc. Local identity and social memory were partially transmitted to these people from their parents. However, being better educated and grew during Soviet times, they also possess clear ethnic identity. I think it would be interesting to present some of the narratives told by these people about their origin in Shalchininkai region. Poles have the most ambitious stories, claiming to live in this region since the 13th century. They claim to be descendants of Polish merchants, craftsmen, peasants, or nobility who moved from Poland to Great Duchy of Lithuania at this time or later periods, when two countries were bound by the Union. These people claim that during centuries, these territories, Shalchininkai region, belonged to different countries. Poland, Great Duchy of Lithuania, Russia, Soviet Union. But despite these circumstances, their ancestors always lived here. Other ethnic groups, such as Russians, Belarusians, Ukrainians, also claim to be locals. Their parents arrived to southeast of Lithuania in the 19th century or during Soviet period. Their children were born here and call themselves locals as well. Finally, there are Lithuanians who also claim to be locals. Naturally, Lithuanians must be local in Lithuania. After all, Lithuanians are the nation which created modern Lithuania. Some of those people who weren't born in southeast of Lithuania but moved here to work and now have been living here for 30 or 40 years also identify themselves as locals. Okay. And now I will present the narratives and identity of the youngest generation, people born after 1990s, who do not remember Soviet times. These people do not call themselves locals. They also dislike being called locals by others. Some of the young people find this word offensive. As one person put it, being local means being stupid and uneducated. It means you don't know your own history, you don't know Shalchininkai region history, you are stupid and uneducated, end of quote. No wonder these young people don't want to associate themselves with local identity. Some interviewees even claim that such people like locals do not exist. Some young people reject ethnic identity as well. They admit their parents were Poles, Russian, Belarusians, but they don't think about themselves as Poles or Russians or Belarusians. In many cases, civil identity is prevailing among these people. They identify themselves as citizens of Lithuania and have narratives to explain such identification. According to them, ethnic identity leads to conflicts and discrimination, about which they heard from their parents and grandparents. Because of that, they don't want to be involved in ethnic tensions or conflicts. The best way to avoid these tensions is to present oneself as a citizen of Lithuania. Memory transmission from one generation to another was affected by historical circumstances. Two radically different historical periods influenced narratives that were told among locals interviewed by me. The Soviet period and the Republic of Lithuania period. During the Soviet period of the totalitarian rule, people's memory were partially suppressed. It was appropriate and useful to remember and narrate stories about resistance to Nazis and the crimes they have committed. To tell the stories about the people who believed in the Soviet system and gradual improvement in the material well-being in the region. On the other hand, memories of cruel collectivization, deportation to Siberia were suppressed. After 1990s, it became possible to talk about terror locals suffered from the Red Army and Red Partisans, forced and cruel collectivization, deportation to Siberia, persecution of religious people. Existing state and its dominant discourse led local people to feel what kind of memories and narratives are appropriate to share among themselves and the outsiders. It is important to understand that I couldn't gather narratives as they were shared in Soviet times. I can only gather them now. However, it is important to take into consideration how political context influenced people's memories. This suppression of social memory can partially explain different identification strategies chosen by the people. The older generation, who remembered Second World War and after-war period, various hardships and poverty during collectivization, prefer not to demonstrate their clear ethnic identity and to choose safest identification, call themselves locals. Middle-aged people who were born and grew up during the Soviet times, the times of peace and stability, tend to share stories about post-war period and various hardships. They focus their attention on, tend not to share. They focus their attention on the relative material well-being and social security during Soviet times. The good example of such a thinking can be this quote. Soviet Union put Lithuania on its feet at the beginning of 70s. And from then on, we lived well, we lived prosperously until the collapse of the Union, end of quote. These people have much more clear expressed ethnic identity. Youngest generation knows almost nothing about the situation in Shalchininkai region during the Second World War or post-war period, the collectivization. They possess mostly common knowledge they have learned at school. I think it's connected with the previously mentioned young people's wish to distance themselves from local identity and ethnic identity. As it was mentioned in the theoretical part, social memory, especially narratives, are extremely important in forming and maintaining local identity. Naturally, if young people want to distance themselves from their grandparents and parents' identities, they are not interested in social memory, which is important in creating and maintaining collective identity. It is important to mention that young people are the most influenced by globalization. Historically, Shalchininkai region was economically, culturally, and politically isolated. For example, Polish historians describe Vilnius region as one of the most underdeveloped and backward region in Poland during the interwar period. This region maintained a certain degree of underdevelopment during the Soviet times as well. Globalization started to affect this region only after the independence of Lithuania. Not willingness to identify oneself as local or express one clear ethnic identity by the youth can be closely related to globalization. About 1/5 of young people interviewed by me express some form of globalized identity. A good example of such identification can be such a statement. I quote, I was born in Eišiškės. I lived here, but I don't know who I really am. I like to think about myself in a broad sense, that I live in Europe, so I call myself a European. I can say I'm a Christian as well, so I can identify with Christians around the world. I don't like the idea of being local, because being local means identify just with one region or one town, end of quote. One of the reasons why young people identify with such a broad geographic area is easy internet access. Talking about their favorite movies, actors, singers, young people mention United States, Russia, or even Australia pop culture stars. Some of them participated in Erasmus exchange program or in summer camps in Poland. Some of them have friends abroad with whom they keep in touch very often thanks to social networks. For these reasons, it is much easier for these young people to think about themselves as Europeans or simply humans. It is important to stress that only about 1/5 of young people demonstrated such a globalized identity. The rest demonstrated civil identity, thinking about themselves as citizens of Lithuania, or emphasized ethnic identity, which they adopted from their parents. So to sum up, as I have said, there are three basic strategies and three kinds of social memory. The oldest inhabitants identify as locals. Middle-aged people combine local and ethnic identity, while younger generation put emphasis on civil identity or claim to identify with such a vague cultural ideas like Europe or humanity. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Good. Thank you, Vidmantas. Thank you for your interesting presentation. Yes, about this quite unique, maybe place, about this intersection, people in this intersection of histories and powers and self-understandings and so on. Yeah, okay, we are looking forward for your dissertation. and okay, some questions here, please. Michael, yes, please.
I have a question.
Okay.
It's interesting, in many discussions about European Union, many commentators say that a great failure of the EU is its inability to create a European identity that people can feel some emotional commitment to. So I found it very surprising and interesting when you said that some of the younger people you interviewed did seem to have some sense of European identity. Would you say that was common among the young people you spoke to, or was it a minority opinion among them?
Thank you for your question. Well, as I have mentioned, about maybe 20% of young people to whom I interviewed expressed such an identity. But you also have to keep in mind that I'm doing not quantitative, but qualitative research. So the amount of people I speak is very little. I spoke maybe with 20, as I said, I spoke with 90 people in general. And from those 90, the young people are maybe 20. So, and only 1/5 of them express this European identity. And I think it is important to stress that it's not that much they want to identify with European identity, but maybe in the first place, they want to distance themselves from this local identity. And as you know, they want not to be local, so they choose this European identity as some kind of supplement. Maybe this is the case.
Thank you.
Thank you. And happily, Vidmantas, you've done your interviews before these borders were closed. And
I'm extremely happy about that.
yes.
I also have a question.
Oh, okay.
Yes, a methodological one. Well, thank you first. Thank you very much for your paper. It was very interesting for me to hear that. Let me see if I can quickly find the abstract. In your abstract, you state that in your research, you also look at what kinds of narratives do locals tell among themselves. And I was wondering about your position as a researcher, kind of, have you paid special attention to getting to know exactly these among themselves narratives, and also how do you do it? How can you get people to tell you what they kind of, how they tell, what they talk about among themselves?
Okay, thank you for your question. Well, okay, I must say a few things. First of all, I put my focus on live story narratives, which people that just told me the entire life story. And when we speak about like daily narratives that occur in a daily life, participant observation was very useful because I spent some time as an anthropologist should do in these local communities, like living with these people and interacting with them on a daily basis. So you can simply, you know, when you are in let's say in a dormitory or you preparing food in a kitchen, and you can hear what the people next to you simply are talking with you to each other, or you can walk in a park and listen accidentally, of course, what other people are talking. So my main method was live stories interviews, and the second was this participant observation. But yes, what you are saying, this is very important methodological problem, because I, as an outsider who come to the community, it's very difficult to make people share these intimate narratives with me. So this is a great methodological problem of which I'm aware. But I try to solve it by combining these different methods like observation, participant observation, in-depth interviews.
Thank you, Vidmantas, once more. Okay. I see we have to make some small lunch break. Yes, am I right? We decided to leave a conference for